Top of page 21. You'd best be thankful we've saved 3 of sheep, Caleb told her with pride. But for Maggie and me, there wouldn't be much as a snag of wool left. And what good are sheep to me without a spinning wheel? She answered him shortly, turning to one of the quilts, the better to dry in the sun. But for all her fault finding, Dolly Sargent was easy with her bound out girl that day. She set her no tasks beyond looking out for the children and gave her even a bit of tallow to rub on a great bruise that had risen on her forehead. Already it was turning a deep purple, a sight which seemed to gratify Caleb. My, he said, but you're an easy battered. Guess I'm a tough bear, or I'd be all black and blue all over. Oh, hush up, his Uncle Ira told him good-naturedly. Whatever it was struck her no farther. There being only enough milk for the baby and 2 younger children, besides some hardtack, the men set out finding food. What would you say to a taste of Marblehead turkey? Suggested Captain Hunt. Wind's light enough to spare 2 hands from the ropes. Marguerite looked at her in amazement at these words, and Ira smiled as he and Caleb brought out 2 hooks and lines. Even the twins were less ignorant of such matters than she. They soon explained to her that it was a codfish that they were after, not wild fowl. With some hoarded bits of dried fish for bait, they cast their lines over to the side, and soon several speckled cod and haddock or 2 were flopping underfoot. Meantime, Joel Sargent had rekindled a fire in the old iron kettle, sacrificing a stick or 2 of wood from the broken hen coop, which he had been drying in the sun. It took him a good while to whittle off shavings and get these alight with his flint and steel. But at last it was blazing well, and Dolly's spider heating in readiness. Caleb was an old hand at cleaning fish, and soon they were ready to eat. Nothing's tastier 'n cod fresh out of water, said Captain, as he finished his tossed backbone overboard. And if I'd placed a hot o' Johnny cakes beside, I would have swapped up King George myself. I wouldn't swap with King George myself. But Dolly Sargent felt otherwise. Half-rod cod and no salt to season 'em ain't my idea of a proper meal, she told to him. We kind of already talked about how Dolly's comments and her demeanor represents her in a way that nothing is good enough. Think of another example when nothing has been good enough for her character. Cook 'em in the sea water next time, and if they're more to your fancy, Dolly, Ira laughed. Ira, We'll boil you down some brine, soon we'll get ashore, her husband comforted her. Or maybe there's some old the sheep salt that I can get at below. Marguerite could not relish hers, feeling still too spent and weak from the night's storm. About sunset, Captain Hunt steered the Isabella B close to shore, a steep coastline of jagged rock with thick-set evergreen trees growing down to the cliff's edge. Against the clear, pale yellow of the sky, the trees appeared very wild and tattered, like knot hosts in endless procession. I love the author's use of wild and tattered. The diction or word choice, specific word choice, for that really creates a movie mind. My movie in my mind. Wild and tattered. Never see so many trees in all my born days, said Becky, as the children crowded to the rail. You're going to see a heap more 'fore long, said the captain told them. Dolly Sargent said nothing to this, but Marguerite noticed that she drew her cloak closer about her. It was only when they passed a small clearing with 3 or 4 houses in it that she showed any signs of interest. Those folks are cooking supper, she said, and I can tell by the chimney smoke. It was true. All the chimneys had straight gray threads of smoke rising from them, and in the scallop of the harbor several boats were moored. The sea was quiet as they passed. In the stillness a dog's bark came to them quite clearly. That night they cast over the Isabella B's anchor and lay till daylight off a high promontory. Cape Elizabeth, Captain Hunt had called it, cheering them with the assurance that the next morning they would reach Falmouth. All their spirits rose at this, especially Dolly Sargent's. She was almost gay as she doled out the hasty pudding she had stirred up from their rather wet water-soaked cornmeal. Ira joked with her as they ate. "I expect you'll be a rare treat to those folks in Falmouth, Dolly," he said. "I doubt they've ever seen a bonnet like yours before." "Or ever will again, likely," she answered, pinching at a stitched cloth of its brim. That wettin' look out what gimp it had. That wettin' took out what gimp it had. Still, I'm thankful to have one after all. Still, I'm thankful to have one at all after last night. Ooh, sorry about that. Marguerite could hear them as she sat in the dimness of the cabin, rocking Debbie to sleep in the little wooden cradle, which had excuse me, which had miraculously escaped the fate of the other pieces of furniture. Since there was no one by to hear or chide her for using the French words, she sang the refrain of a lullaby she had learned of Grammier long ago. Do l'enfant dorma binu. Do l'enfant dorma tantu. Next morning, with sunrise scarcely faded out of the sky, they were tacking between wooded islands, very green and pleasant, with a farm or two set in the clearing of the larger ones. The captain was familiar in waters here, having come several seasons back for fishing, but he was too busy of picking his course and giving his orders for shifting sail to answer Dolly's questions about names and inhabitants. At last they could make out Falmouth, its house scattered along the wide harbor of smooth water, where a number of fishing smacks and a dozen half vessels rode at anchor. "Not near so many houses as I thought," remarked Caleb, squinting his eyes through blue slits to better see. "Marblehead was a lot bigger," said Susan. "Well, it looks good to me," their mother told them. "I'm fair hankering to go ashore." "They've got a church steeple anyhow," Becky pointed out. "Yes, and a battery," cried Caleb. "See the cannon on top?" "That's the fort I've heard tell of," explained Ira, as he hurried by on his way to shorten the sail. "They need to keep sharp watch for the French and Injuns." "Hear that, Maggie?" crowed Caleb with a grimace. "Maybe they'll fire at you." A couple things. Check your graphic organizer. Do you have any thoughts, comments, questions about what you've read so far? So let's summarize in our own words what's going on. Looks like they reached land. Dolly Sargent, yay, is happy. And it looks like that they're just looking and taking in all of the landscape. There's a word that jumped out at here to me at the bottom of this page, battery, because you live really close to Charleston's Battery. So think about the things, the physical things in the battery, cannons and the park, and think about what the battery was actually used for and how we use it today, like comparing. And then how they've described their fort here. There's some words that kind of jump out at me. Cannons and fort, like the defense, sharp watch against the French and Indian. So there's just a really cool comparison to our battery in Charleston and the battery that they're talking about here at Falmouth. Top of page 25. "No, no," shrilled Jacob, clinging to Marguerite's skirts in sudden terror. "Not shoot Maggie." There, put in Dolly Sargent. "Quit your crying, Jacob. They'll not do any shooting if folks behave theirselves. 'Tis only Injuns and the wicked French in Canada thereafter." Marguerite's cheeks flushed under her sea tan. Then she reached down and took Jacob's hand in hers. This was not the first time that she'd heard such word about her people, and it will not be the last. They left a soreness round her heart, which persisted in spite of the warmth of the child's clinging fingers, and the quick chatter of the little girls. I would they were not at war. Why must they fight each other all those miles in a new land? But already the men were casting anchor and making the dory ready to swing over to the side. Some little distance from the town, they could see a slope of green meadowland going down to a salt inlet. Blue flags grew by the water's edge, and a number of cattle were feeding their backs tawny in the sun. I'll warrant it's good pasturage there, Joel Sargent said. "'Twould be better to land the stock to graze, but I doubt we could haul 'em aboard again." Going back to that French comment, I wanted to note that think about how Marguerite was probably feeling at this time. She's obviously French. She sounds pretty patriotic, like she sounds pretty proud of being French. However, she has to be quiet about it. So this would probably be a good time to write on your graphic organizer some comments or questions that you might have about that specifically. Bottom of page 25. This time we agreed upon, no, we'd a time hosting from the raft in Marblehead, Ira reminded him. Put Caleb and the young ones ashore there. He can cut grass to last the rest of the voyage while we make for the port. This was agreed upon, though the twins complained bitterly that they were not to see Pharma, and Caleb looked his disgust at being consigned to the company of Marguerite and the children. The dowry was stoutly made, fashioned for rough weather. It had once been painted a deep yellow, and there was a mast and a sail which could be hoisted beside two pairs of heavy oars between wooden pins. These Ira and his brother pulled, while Caleb sat astern and worked another rudder. Marguerite watched his men behind their oars from his place in the bows with the children, who cried out in high spirits at the dash of salt spray in their faces. And so the dory grated a strip of Pebble Beach, and they came ashore. The boat doesn't really play a huge role, but I wanted to see how I don't have a lot of experience with boats, and you're familiar with sailing, so I wondered if there was a compare and contrast or more of a comparison between words like dory and stern and oars and rudder, just some boat terms. So I wondered what you thought. I got plenty of chores to keep me busy, Caleb said importantly, as he swung the sickle he had brought to cut the grass. So you young ones stay with Maggie and don't come a-muckling me. Grass felt cool and soft to their feet after the hot boards of the Isabella B, and farther up the water, wild strawberries grew in abundance. Marguerite had never seen them so thick and red, and not even those that the market women had brought to sell in their shallow baskets had ever tasted so sweet. The children filled their hands and mouths. Little Jacob and Patty's lips were soon scarlet smeared, but the twins helped Marguerite to fill a small splint basket she had fetched along. She showed them how to line in first with flat green leaves, as Grandmere had taught her. They had made a great to-do about the berries they dropped in, but more went into their mouths. "Ah," sighed Marguerite, "but they are sweet, as to smell as sweet, and my fingertips are delicious." "I guess Caleb want this whole basket hisself," remarked Susan, looking towards the lower part of the meadow, where they could see him at work. "He'll be that hungry after cutting the grass." "Well, he'll not get these, shall he, Maggie?" Becky broke in. "I'm lot having some for my supper." "Then you best drop in some more," cautioned Marguerite. "I doubt you've put in 20, all told." When the basket was filled, they went to rest by a clump of birch and spruce. The twins had brought along Jerusha, their corncob doll, and Marguerite showed them how to fashion a fine green dress for her from two large leaves with daisy heads stuck in one for a pattern. "I'd admire to have one such myself," declared Becky, "of green cloth with white posies all over." Ma says we're lucky to get plain Holland or bunting, Susan reminded her. But maybe when we're old enough to marry, we'll have sprigged calico. Again, that word calico shows up. Significance? I wore printed dresses in France, Marguerite told them. She seldom spoke of such things with the others about, but here, with the children, she felt more at ease. Yes, she went on, her dark eyes shining with remembrance. In summer there was one with the small green vines on yellow stuff, and in winter a brown chalice with little roses and marguerites. We chose it because of my father, only you call them daisies instead. We chose it because of my name, only you call them daisies instead. Ma says she won't call you no such Frenchfield name, Susan pointed out. Oh, duck your head quick, broke in Becky, as the dragonfly went over them, its wings and shimmer of blue and silver in the sun. But why? Marguerite asked of them as children all ducked with little excited cries. Why do you do that? It's the devil's darning needle, piped up Jacob, burying his round head in her lap. Oh no, mustn't let it get you. We're going to stop there. That's the bottom of page 27. Fill out your graphic organizer, and um, we'll have one more reading for you to do over the weekend.